بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد نبي الرحمة وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We are going to be benefiting today, inshallah ta'ala, with some really great spiritual wisdom from three of the real luminaries of our age, Habib Umar bin Hafiz, Habib Kadhim al-Saqaf, and Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah. And they'll tell us about many of the spiritual dimensions of the month of Ramadan, the month of fasting, the month of turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll leave the high matters to them. I'll deal with some of the fundamental basics on the sound fast, right? So that we make sure that our fast is correct. But before we do that, just to look at what is the fast. What is the fast? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us in the Quran to fast. And the verses on fasting are incredible. They're just 4 verses that come together that give us all the guidance with respect to fasting. All the fiqh of fasting, like how you fast, both the fast itself and all the exceptions with respect to fasting. The traveling person, the sick person, the one in difficulty. And the verses also tell us what is the spiritual aim of fasting. Why does Allah make us fast? So it is a good practice that as the month approaches, we should strive to review what our Lord tells us about the fast. And that's just a good habit to establish. One way to avoid making our acts of worship mere habits and rituals is to use the special times and special occasions as opportunities to reconnect. So when Ramadan is coming, this is a time to reconnect. What does Allah tell us about fasting? What does the Prophet ﷺ tell us about fasting? And to remind ourselves, right, so that we approach it in the right way. So I'm not going to cover these verses. This is sort of an assignment for you. Go back, it's 4 verses, not that difficult. Right? And reflect. And with verses such as this, it's also good to try to, part of reflecting is to try to see, okay, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling me here? Right? There's fiqh that is clearly there, and we look at what is understood from these verses with respect to a valid fast, etc. But we also look, right, at what is the spiritual purpose of fasting. What am I supposed to try to attain through the fast? So reflect on the key lessons with respect to fasting and the month of Ramadan, for example. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the month of Ramadan is a month in which the Quran was revealed. It is a month of the Quran. And one of the reasons we turn in devotion in this month is out of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the gift of the Quran, the gift of guidance, ultimately the gift of what gives meaning to life. But these verses also touch upon the spiritual purpose of fasting. And the spiritual purpose of fasting, as we'll be looking during the Wednesday class, there's 3 spiritual aims of fasting that are mentioned in these verses. The first is كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Fasting was prescribed upon you as it was prescribed upon those before you, in order that you may attain taqwa, mindfulness, God consciousness, piety. Right? That's an aim of fasting, a benefit of fasting. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, in highlighting the different teachings of this month, tells us لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, in order that you may be grateful. Beginning with recognizing that our food and drink and the other provisions of life are a blessing from Allah. And through the reflection that the month of fasting is meant to nurture within us, to cultivate gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's an aim of this month. And the third, what changes in the month of Ramadan? Suddenly, religious matters take a much more central part in our life because of the nature of fasting and the refraining that it entails from a whole number of matters. And that's part of the wisdom of this month. لِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, so that you may magnify Allah. Right? And takbir, to realize the primacy of the divine in one's life and of turning to Him. But these purposes of fasting, these maqasid of fasting, these are all aims that are a means to an ultimate purpose. The ultimate aim of fasting, like everything else that we do, is recognizing, realizing, and attaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in verse 186, after giving most of the rulings of fasting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. And it's quite interesting because it seems to be an interlude. There's verses that come before that talk about fasting, and there's one more verse left about fasting. And between them, near the end, but there's just one verse left of the verses on fasting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, and if my servants ask you regarding me. How does that relate to fasting? Because the previous verses, 183, 184, 185, talk about fasting and its purpose and how you fast and so on. And then verse 187 concludes the discussion on fasting. There's an interlude. But this interlude is not a digression. Rather, it is a culmination of what is mentioned before. That these aims of fasting, what do they culminate in? And the acts of fasting, as described, what is their result? وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, and if my servants ask you regarding me, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, I am indeed close. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ, I answer the call of those who call upon me when they call. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي, so let them answer my call. So let them answer my call. وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي, and let them truly believe in me. Because faith is two faiths. There's mere faith, which is to accept that yes, I believe in God. And there is realization of faith, that the faith comes to life, bears fruit, and goes towards the perfection of faith. Okay? So let them believe in me. They're already His servants. If my servants, and Allah's servants are those who believe in Him, ask about me, I'm indeed near. I answer the call of those who call. So they believe in Him. They call upon Him. So let them answer my call and let them believe in me. Meaning let them truly believe in me. That your religion is not just some things you do. It has a purpose. It has a realization. So, which is when you answer the call of Allah. So let them answer my call and let them believe in me. Let them truly believe in me. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ, so that they may be rightly guided. Rightly guided to what? To closeness. Because Allah is close to you. Right? It is we who are distant from Allah. As Ibn Ata'illah says, لَيْسَ الْحَقُّ بِمَحْجُوبٍ عَنْكَ, the most real is not veiled from you. بَلِ الْمَحْجُوبُ أَنْتَ, but rather it is you who are veiled from Him. Right? By our heedlessness, by our lack of concern, by our lack of turning to Him. And nothing veils Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because anything that would veil Him would limit Him, would have sway over Him, And He is the one who has sway over all things. Nothing limits God. Right? It is we who are held down. Right? We wrong ourselves when we are distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because His reality is, I am near. And this is what fasting is meant to nurture, even by the very reality of the hunger that we experience. It makes us recognize our neediness. And is when you recognize that your neediness is not just for food and drink, your ultimate need is for Allah at every moment. Right? And that's what fasting cultivates. And we'll look at those spiritual dimensions in the presentations of our teachers. But what is fasting itself? What is fasting itself? Things are known by their definitions. So the word sawm or siyam in the Arabic language, what does it mean? The word siyam in the Arabic language, fasting, what does it mean? Yeah, it refers to refraining, abstaining. And you can use the word sama in a general linguistic sense, particularly if you look at pre-Islamic Arabic, right? You could use the word siyam for even things that, even from speech, for example, as is come in the Quran. Okay? So it just means to refrain. Fasting, particularly in its religious sense, fasting refers to a particular type of refraining. A particular type of refraining as an act of worship. And what is that particular refraining? What do you refrain from? What do you refrain from? Yeah, food, drink, and one's physical desires. Like for the whole month? Yeah. In a specified time. Right? And for it to be an act of worship with intention. Right? So there's really four aspects to the legal reality of fasting. That fasting is refraining from nullifiers, refraining from that which nullifies the fast during the day, right? During the day, with intention, with intention. Now this is obvious. We all know. We've been fasting. We know that this is what it is. But there's things that require, clarification and issues that arise if we look at this definition. So refraining, right? That's the reality of fasting, right? And there's an outward refraining which is for a valid fast, right? There's an outward refraining that's for the legally valid fast. But it's clear from the sunnah that and it's from Allah's mercy that He doesn't say, for your fast to be valid, you have to refrain from all things that I have prohibited. For your fast to be valid with that standard, it would be difficult. And from Allah's mercy, there's only a restricted number of things that He has made the fast's validity dependent upon. That's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we see from the sunnah that the beneficial fast, the transformative fast, we refrain from all that is prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we strive to go beyond that, to refrain from all that is disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? As an encouragement. And there's many hadiths on that. And I'd encourage each of us to review the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ with respect to fasting. Any of us who are serious about our deen should strive to read a chapter on the merits of fasting, for example, from The Gardens of the Righteous by Imam Nawawi, or a similar work. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ said, for example, whoever will not desist from false speech and from acting upon it, then Allah is in no need for their hunger and thirst. And and there's much censure that has come regarding backbiting and slander in this month, argumentation and anger, etc. And this refraining results in taqwa. Right? This refraining is itself what taqwa is, what God consciousness entails. From nullifiers, and I hate the term nullifiers, by the way, but saves typing. From that which nullifies, from the things that break the fast, or that nullify the fast, which we'll look at, right? So it's from a limited number of things. Because there's many other things that enter one's body, for example, that don't break the fast. Air goes in, doesn't break the fast. There's many things that are completely unavoidable that don't break the fast. Thankfully, we live in a place where not a lot of people smoke, or they do so in very restricted places. They're like oppressed animals kind of thing. It's like kind of sad, actually. Especially in winter, you see these people standing outside, they're smoking. It's like either they're criminal or oppressed, right? Like, feel kind of almost sad for them. But, in some places, there's smoking going on all over the place. So what if you inhale that? There's some issues, right? During the day, right? During the day. And especially in more northern latitudes, etc., issues arise. When does Fajr enter? Right? And that's one of the questions I will address. With intention, because it's an act of worship. Right? And intention has an aspect of validity, and it also has an aspect of reward. Intention has an aspect of validity, and to be clear, in Ramadan, you can assume that you have the intention to fast. Because if anyone asks you, what are you doing tomorrow? What would you say? I'm fasting. So the intention is assumed to be there. Right? You went to sleep, you wanted to get up for suhoor. If you paused the flow of time and asked, why did you try to wake up at 3:30 or whenever you try to wake up? To have suhoor. Why do you want to have suhoor? Because I want to fast. So the intention can be assumed to be there. But that's in terms of validity. But the other aspect of the intention is reward. And we'll touch upon that. So when it comes to refraining from the things that invalidate the fast, there's things that can go wrong. Right? Things that can go wrong. And the things that can go wrong in the fast can go wrong in three ways. One is deliberate. And that's a bit of a serious problem, right? Unless you had a genuine excuse. Right? You deliberately ate, drank, or fulfilled your sexual desires. That obviously breaks the fast, right? That obviously breaks the fast. That's if you did it deliberately. But then, non-deliberate loss of refraining there's two cases. There's accidents and there's forgetfulness. So accidents break the fast. Right? Because fasting is refraining from certain things. What if there was an accident? The refraining was lost, right? So you need to be careful about accidents. What would be an accident? An accident would be, for example, you were gargling and you swallowed the water. That's an accident. It breaks the fast, and it's clear from the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ that it does. The Prophet ﷺ was instructing how to perform wudu. He said, then when you wash in wudu, do so thoroughly. And when you rinse in wudu, rinse your mouth and nose in wudu, do so thoroughly, unless you're fasting. In which case, don't. Why? Lest water go down your throat, right? Now, no one gargles in order to drink water, right? Water can accidentally go down the throat. And from that and many other hadiths, accidents do break the fast. And the default is legally anything that goes in, right, of that which nullifies a fast would nullify it. But the Prophet ﷺ made one exception, which is if something was, if one of these things took place forgetfully. Okay, if one of these things took place forgetfully, such as you ate a whole meal forgetfully, would that break the fast? No. That's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Actually, the Prophet ﷺ said, if that happens, one should be thankful to Allah. Of course, you can't forget deliberately. Say, I'm going to forget and have lunch today. That's deliberate, right? But if it happens, one should be thankful to Allah because it is Allah who facilitated that for you. And I was sort of in high thankfulness mode when I was overseas. In Jordan one year, I in a set of 7 voluntary fasts that I did, 6 of them I ate or drank. 4 of them I had a full meal. 3 of them, it was a full meal with dessert. The one that wasn't a full, that wasn't like actually having a meal, one of the 2 cases that wasn't having an actual meal was 5 minutes before Maghrib. I went and told a friend of mine that could he go to the airport to pick up a friend of mine. He said, why don't you come with me? I said, because I'm fasting. He said, then hold on a second. He went and grabbed a cup of tea for the road. I said, like, what is that? You're drinking tea and you don't give me any? So I grabbed the cup from him and I drank the whole thing. He's like shocked. He said, you're fasting. I said, it's from Allah. Right? And so that's mercy. But forgetfulness is an exception. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ made it an exception. Just legally, had the Prophet ﷺ not made it an exception, forgetfulness would also break the fast because something went in. But let's say Zubayr and Zubaydah are having a rough first year of marriage. Okay? And Zubaydah is like, she's tough. She's like, she's from a Bedouin background, right? And you don't mess with the Bedouins, right? So Zubayr is asleep. So Zubaydah says, I'm going to show you who you mess with, right? So what she does, she records it and she pours water down his throat. Right? And it's not just recorded, it's being live streamed. So she puts on Periscope or whatever that here's Zubayr breaking his fast. Of course, don't do it because it's sinful. Right? But if she does it, she pours water down his throat and he's sure that he did swallow. Does it break the fast? Does it break the fast? Yes, it does. Because that's considered an accident. Now, of course, the person who did that would be sinful because you've just broken someone's fast. So in that case, there will be no sin involved. You have the full reward of that intention, but you must make it up. And of course, that rarely happens. When have you ever heard of something like that happening? But if it does, it can potentially happen. University days, we poured half a can of Coke down someone's throat while they're sleeping. So if it happened, and they happened to be fasting, you would break their fast. But practically, be careful in wudu. That's one of the practical areas. Be careful in wudu. And how do you do it? By leaning forward. So when you rinse your mouth, just lean forward a little so the water won't go down your throat. That's one. Number 2, if you brush your teeth, right? If you accidentally swallow the toothpaste, that's an accident, it breaks the fast. So what do? If you do use toothpaste, use only a little and rinse out your mouth. And one rinsing of the mouth is sufficient. Okay, one rinsing of the mouth. Any aftertaste that's left after that is excused. Because that's mere taste without any substance. Right? One rinsing is sufficient. But it is superior to, unless there's other considerations, it's superior in itself to avoid using toothpaste during the day in Ramadan. Right? In itself. You can brush your teeth, you can use a siwak, but because the toothpaste itself is an external substance, you avoid that because it can risk the fast. That's one of the benefits of the toothstick, right? That you can use the toothstick in Ramadan. But they may be considered. You have a job interview. You work in sales, and you woke up smelling like the garbage dump, right? Now, so if you need to brush your teeth, it's not, it's just something that's superior to avoid in itself. So if you do need to brush your teeth, use only a little bit of toothpaste and rinse out. Yeah, rinse your mouth once and that's sufficient. So that's accidents. Forgetfulness, when you don't remember, is completely excused. Any questions here? Okay. Go ahead. That's a good question. If you saw someone eating while they're fasting, they say just pause for a moment. If there's someone elderly, the fuqaha mentioned this. Fuqaha are pretty stern, but they have some semblance of a soft heart sometimes. So if they're elderly, for example, then just let them be. There's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? If they're elderly. Or there's someone who's traveling, for example, and they're sick and they forgot and they're eating, just let them be. But otherwise, you remind them, right? You remind them because, like anyone who's chosen to fast wouldn't willfully eat. So you just remind them that, oh, by the way, tactfully, you remind them. Go ahead. Should the intention of fasting be verbalized? No, we'll be coming to the intention, but it doesn't need to be verbalized unless it helps. So from nullifiers, we've mentioned that there's 3 aspects to that, right? From eating and drinking and intercourse. Now we'll look at each of these. There's a few issues. One thing is, with respect to eating and drinking, keep in mind the difference between accidents and forgetting. Accidents do break the fast. Right? So for example, let's say you have a grocery store and someone's trying to sell you salt. Right? And you don't really trust them. They're your cousin and they're a bit of a shady character. So this is really good Himalayan salt. Right? You don't believe it. You can actually taste something. Does tasting break the fast? No. If you know anything about taste, you don't have to swallow to taste something. So you could taste it. Or you work as a chef and you don't know if you put salt. Could you taste? Yes. When you don't need to, you avoid it. But if you accidentally swallow that, what would happen? It breaks the fast. Right? So that's the difference between, you put someone, it tastes good, and you instinctively swallow, that's an accident. But you forgot, and you had a whole, you tried one kufta, and it was really good. So, and you had 2, 3, and there's none left to serve. That's forgetting. Okay? And why is it? That's the way the Prophet ﷺ made the distinction. So, food also includes anything that has a tangible substance that goes down into your body cavity. Anything that has a tangible substance that goes down your body cavity. So some people have a bad habit, they'll like eat paper, if you bite your nails, that's not exactly food, but it will still break your fast. Anything that has a tangible body cavity that goes down your anything that has a tangible substance that goes into your body cavity, right, will be considered akin to eating if it's solid or drinking if it's liquid. Right? So what about smoke? What about smoke? Right? What about smoke? Smoking breaks your fast. Right? Simple as that. Smoking breaks your fast because it's considered to have a perceptible body. Smoke is considered to be a perceptible body. Right? You can see it. So if you smoke, it breaks your fast. Right? Whatever you smoke. Right? Inhalers break your fast. Now, there's pretty much no excuse for you to be smoking, but an inhaler, for example, you may need to use it. So if someone needs some kind of inhaler or puffer or whatever, if the need arises, now whether you should or not, that's a medical issue, that's not a legal issue, but if the need does arise, that you need to use it, then that may be, if it's a genuine need, that if you don't use it, there'll be some hardship or harm, then that would be an excuse to break the fast. So you'll have the reward for your intention to fast. You have the full reward of that, and then when you make it up later, you'll be rewarded again. So if something like that happens, you don't view it that you're losing out. You view it, it's a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are rewarded for your intention. You have the full reward of the full action because you intended to fast. And if it arises that you need to take medication, for example, like an inhaler, and it's not reasonably avoidable without harm, then you don't lose the reward of that intention, and when you do it again, you're rewarded a second time for it. Because we don't just do our acts of devotion because we have to. They're rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His mercy. So, and then of course, when it comes to you having to use something like an inhaler or something, you avoid getting into a situation that you would require an inhaler. So you know that if you run after the bus, you may need to use the inhaler, then don't run after the bus. Right? But you have to, because if you don't catch the train, you'll be fired from work, then run after it, and if it breaks your fast, then you're not responsible. Smoke that's unavoidable is excused. Smoke that's unavoidable. To enter, you work you work somewhere where there's smoke. There's a lot of smoke. If you walk through a smoky place, you're still allowed to breathe. Right? Because breathing is not something you can reasonably avoid. So you're not held responsible for that. If you're in the kitchen and there's smoke there's steam coming out, can you breathe while you're cooking? Yeah, right? You can, and that's excused. But you cannot deliberately, while aware that you're fasting, directly inhale the smoke or steam from your food. Right? So let's say you're cooking something that's letting out a lot of steam, whatever it is. So you can just breathe normally and that's fine. But avoid sticking your head over it and deliberately breathing in. If you do that while conscious of fasting, that breaks your fast. Right? So just be careful. Okay? So you're walking by someone smoking, you just happen to inhale it, you're not held accountable. But you used to be an ex-smoker, so you want to figure out, is that this brand or that brand? So you go up to them and you choose deliberately to smoke, that would break your fast. Right? So, obviously don't. Right? And drink as well, any liquid that you take in. But this taking in of a solid substance is from a recognized point of entry. Right? Which normally would be the mouth and the nose. Normally. So there's a few implications for this. One is that, and there's some detail depending on what school, but certainly in the Hanafi school, injections don't break the fast. Injections don't break the fast. Some people distinguish between a muscular injection and an injection that goes into your blood, etc. But the broad rule, and if you want to be cautious, then find out, but injections don't break the fast. Even if they're of something for nutritive purposes. But if you do it without medical need, it would diminish the reward of your fast. So you get glucose injections or whatever just to make fasting easy for you. That will diminish your reward, and you may have you can't trick Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're cheating. You can't cheat God. You're just cheating yourself. Right? And practically, if you're able to fast, you do so. If you're not, Allah has excused you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has excused you, so you don't. So injections don't break the fast. Suppositories do. suppositories do break the fast. Right? And other things that don't break the fast, actually the Prophet ﷺ highlighted a number of these. If kuhl, what do you call it? Antinomy or anti? Yeah, kuhl. Apparently that's a sharp taste. Don't taste it, probably shouldn't, right? But if you applied kuhl to the eyes, some people would sometimes feel that they had a taste of that after a while in their throat. That's excused. There's hadiths about it, right? So that's not considered a recognized, from that and other hadiths, that's not considered a recognized point of entry into the body. Right? So if you applied kuhl to the eyes and you felt like some kind of taste of it in your throat, it's excused. And there's some discussion about it between the schools, if you wish you could find out further. Similarly, if you took a shower and you don't recall with certitude that you swallowed water, but afterwards you find a cool sensation in your throat or stomach as if you'd swallowed water, it does not break your fast. Unless you're sure that you did in fact swallow something. And sensations are ignored. I don't know like the science of it, but sometimes mere sensations are ignored. And I know from dealing with all kinds of, I don't get misgivings. Sometimes I get murmurings of misgivings, but I direct my high capacity for belligerence towards the misgivings and they flee. So, alhamdulillah, they stay away from me. But there's people who get serious waswasa. And it's easy to imagine sensations that aren't there. So there's some people like, you rinse, you don't have to just take a shower. Some people wash their face. I think I may have swallowed something because I can feel something in my stomach. Feelings are excused. The question is, are you sure that you swallowed something? Like, do you recall actually swallowing some solid or liquid? If you're not, ignore sensations. And that's from mercy from Allah. And you're not responsible for reality. You're just responsible for what you perceive. Now, when we talk about fulfillment of sexual desires, there's two things that break the fast. One is actual intercourse. Actual intercourse breaks the fast unless it was forgetful. Now, that's highly unlikely. If it happens, this is the ruling. A couple engage in sexual intercourse while fasting, even in Ramadan, and they said, well, it's between you and Allah. If you are forgetful, it does not break the fast. It would be accidental, for example, if they didn't realize the time was in. They thought the time wasn't in, but it was, that breaks the fast. That's considered an accident. So actual intercourse breaks the fast, and deliberate ejaculation breaks the fast. Lesser expression of desire, whether with another or through self-stimulation, is not permitted, but it does not break the fast. It's not permitted, because you're supposed to refrain, but does not break the fast. Whether you look with desire or any of the expressions of desire. Now, what about kissing? Sayyidah Aisha mentioned it explicitly. She said that the Prophet ﷺ used to both kiss and touch during Ramadan. But which of you can control their desires like he did? Right? So from that, the fuqaha explain that mere kissing or mere physical contact is not impermissible in Ramadan, even if it's loving. The basis of kissing is that it's an expression of love. But with desire, it is disliked, and when the desire is strong such that there could be fear of invalidation, it would be strongly disliked or even sinful, right? So, but kissing in itself is not impermissible in Ramadan unless it's with desire, right? And during the day, from the time Fajr comes in till the time Maghrib comes in, So with Fajr, the recommendation, as we know, is to stop about 10 minutes before Fajr time enters. Okay? But that's recommended. You don't have to stop at that time. It is recommended. But if you wake up right at the end of the time, you can finish eating. Now, there are different prayer timetables, right, with respect to Fajr time. 15 degrees, 18 degrees. There's a lot of discussion on that. Whoever wishes to be cautious can take the 18-degree opinion. It's an earlier Fajr time. It is more cautious, and caution is praiseworthy. The 15-degree time is a valid time within the as well, which is the, which many calendars follow. But practically, what you should do, if you follow one, stick to it, right? Stick to it. And one point of caution there are some hadiths that indicate that the Sahaba, if they're still eating and the adhan was given, would complete their eating. But this is the danger of reading hadiths without looking at the context. Right? That's as absurd as saying, well, the Prophet ﷺ said, attack them. Does that mean go attack every person you see? Of course, there's a context. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 2 adhans were given. There's an adhan that was given to indicate that now is the time to stop eating, and then the adhan would be given for Fajr. The Prophet ﷺ had a number of muadhins, but the 2 principal ones were Sayyidina Bilal and Sayyidina Ibn Maktoum. May Allah be well pleased with them. The famous blind companion mentioned in the Quran. And they used to alternate the adhan. They used to both give adhan for Fajr. And they used to sort of swap. When one adhan was given, it meant that now is the recommended time to stop eating. And that's what the hadith refers to in terms of if you're eating and the adhan is given, mean the first adhan, not the second. Imam Nawawi, in his commentary on Sahih Muslim and elsewhere, mentioned there's consensus, ijma', that if you eat after Fajr time has entered, your fast is invalid. And there are some of the misdirected literalists, right? Or you call them our attitudinally divergent brethren, who like promulgating weird opinions. Okay? And beware of messing around with your religion. Right? Don't do that. So, there's 2 valid opinions for fasting. If you follow the 18-degree time, you follow it, stick with it. Take that as your ongoing standard. If you follow the 15-degree time, stick with it and take that as your standard. And both are legally valid to follow. Okay? Find a reliable prayer timetable. Any of our mosques in the GTA, we don't have unusual prayer times here, and you can follow it. And Maghrib is straightforward. Maghrib is when the sun has set. More schedules get that correctly. Just be careful, especially in large metropolitan areas. Sometimes there can be a couple of minutes of difference between one end of the GTA, or for example, in the Greater Toronto area. If you're elsewhere, in large metropolitan areas, there can be 1 or 2 minutes difference between one side and the other, depending on all the things that prayer times depend upon. So just make sure it's in relative to where you are. Right? And unless you're actually observing, you can take, a prayer chart or a prayer alarm as a reliable guide. Right? And it is recommended to hasten to break the fast. It's not recommended. This is one of the times where doing extra is disliked. The Prophet ﷺ said, my ummah will be on good as long as they hasten to break their fast. So once the time is in, you break the fast. Some masjids have a bad habit of say, well, just to be sure, let's wait 5 minutes. In Jordan, for some reason, across the country, they would give the adhan 5 minutes late. So to shock my friends, like when they used to come for iftar, I used to actually open the door, say, Assalamu alaikum, have a date. And I'd put one in my mouth and they haven't given the adhan yet. I had to sometimes delay opening the door until I knew the adhan was, the time was in. I'd open the door and he said, but the adhan's not given. I said, if the muezzin dies, you're not going to break your fast? Because breaking the fast is not dependent on the muezzin, it's dependent on the entering of the time. Of course, if you're in the masjid, don't confuse people. Don't confuse people, right? But that's what it is. Any questions about the times? Go ahead. No, if you're not sure, but for a reason, right? So your phone was dying every your phone's behaving as if there's a jinn in the machine. Then okay, there's a reason, right? But most smartphones, well, let's be opposite. Smartphones tend not to show the time wrong. Yeah, and if the prayer time, you're pretty sure it's sound, then there's no reason to delay. But let's say, you went from Toronto to Hamilton, and you're not exactly sure when the time is in there, etc. Then if you give it 1 or 2 minutes just to be sure, then that's fine. If there's a reason to be careful, that's fine. But there isn't, then that's not praiseworthy caution. That's considered just being excessive. Okay? So you don't have to be, and of course there's also tact. Tact is an important part of deen. Like if you're at someone's house and everyone's waiting, okay, let's wait for the time to come in. And according to your calculation, it is, but there's, you're a guest at someone's house and they haven't broken the fast yet. You don't grab a date and start, there's also tact. Unless they delay excessively, then, but even then you do it in a tactful way. You might just step away to the washroom and, or something like that. But and that's an important thing, that we do the right thing, but we do it tactfully, right, with discretion. There's another question. Go ahead. The adhan has no connection to breaking the fast. If the time is in, you break the fast. There's no basis, especially because some adhans take ages. The sunnah with respect to the adhan is that you answer the adhan, that you listen to it and answer it, right? And if you do that, another mistake that people make is that they make all the du'as of breaking the fast before they break their fast. If you read any of it says, "Oh Allah, I fasted for you, and did this for you and that for you." You're still fasting. Why are you making the du'a right now? Right? It says, or one of the du'as says, ذهب الظمأ, the thirst is gone. وابتلت العروق, and the veins have been moistened. وثبت الأجر, and the reward has been established. Inshallah. Well, not yet, because you haven't broken the fast. So you say Bismillah, you have something to break the fast, like a date, maybe a sip of water, and then you make the dua. Right? And that's a common. Some people go they make 5-minute dua and everyone's waiting to break. That's a mistake. And again, be tactful about it, but yes.
What happens if
If
you, for example, sleep in and you miss the word?
you sleep and miss suhoor, you still fast. Yeah, the suhoor is recommended. It's not an obligation. The suhoor is not an obligation. The last part of the fasting is intention. The intention is 2 parts. Validity, unless you have decided not to fast, any Muslim, it's assumed that they're fasting in Ramadan. And if you doubt, you assume that you intended to fast, right? Why would you wake up for suhoor? Why, and the sign of the intention, if you were to ask, what are you doing tomorrow? You say, I'm fasting. Right? But it is recommended, and also to avoid difference of opinion of some who make things harder than others, they say and also for the reward, it's recommended when you break your fast, make an explicit intention to fast the next day. Because you may not live to the next day. But you'll be rewarded for your intention. And that's just a good thing to do, and there's a number of hadiths that would back it. Even with the prayer, if you finish dhuhr, make the intention that I'll pray asr, and that if you die before asr time comes in, you're rewarded for your intention. Okay? And that there's a sunnah of having a sense of continuity in your actions. When you finish one thing, intend the next good thing, the next virtuous action that you're called upon to do. And even if you don't end up doing it, you're rewarded for it. That's from mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Right? So you make that intention and you make it explicit, but the intention has an aspect of reward as well. And that's what turns merely habitual worship to transformative worship. It is intentions. Right? It's intentions. So one should pause and magnify one's intention before the fast begins. So if, like practically, Fajr being as early as it is, if you fear not getting up, then before you go to sleep, make one way of magnifying intention is to make dua. Oh Allah, make my fast for your sake. Make it an act of worship. Make it a fast in which I acquire taqwa and I'm great. Like, if you ask for something, you intended it. Right? So that's one practical way. And if you're not sure that you'll get up for Fajr, you can magnify that intention before you go to sleep. Okay? But before Fajr time enters, you renew that intention. One practical way to do it is to make dua, asking Allah for these high meanings. Oh Allah, make my fast a means of closeness to you. The meanings that we talked about. Right? And this is what the Prophet ﷺ promised. Right? And we'll stop with this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, Man sama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaba ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbih. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith related by Bukhari and Muslim, whoever fasts Ramadan out of faith and sincere seeking. Ihtisab is seeking its reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having no ulterior motive. All their past sins shall be forgiven. But imana, you do it as an act of faith. You don't just do it out of habit. And you do it genuinely, sincerely, avidly, seeking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the highest thing you can seek from Allah is Allah Himself. His closeness, His love, His good pleasure. Right? And then there's levels of seeking. So you make that intention explicit and manifest. Bismillah ta'ala. So we'll stop here, but before we do, any questions about the aspects of a sound fast? Go ahead.
Especially for new converts, what if they forget that something nullifies the fast? Would that be considered forgetfulness or an accident? So, for example, one forgets that drinking is.
Okay, so if someone, that's considered an accident, right? Forgetting that something can't be done is considered an accident, right? Someone is. Now there's two aspects there, right? One is the reward, and one's rewarded according to intention, not according to soundness. Right? So I have a friend who someone taught him that you fast from sunrise to sunset. So my friend, Spanish convert, said it was so beautiful. He was living alone in this house in like southern Spain. So he used to sit at the porch, pray Fajr, then prepare a nice breakfast and watch as the sun grew closer to the horizon. And just before it did, he'd stop, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and watch the sunrise. Said it would be such a spiritual experience. And the whole month he was alone. Now, there's no relationship between validity and soundness. Should we be hopeful that, have high hope from Allah that He'll be rewarded for every single fast of those? Yes, for his intention. But were those fasts valid? In of themselves, no. In of themselves, no. So when one gets to, and if one knew, there's a separate case if someone just became Muslim and they didn't even know about fasting. That may be a special case. Someone became Muslim and they hadn't yet had the opportunity to learn, but he was mistaught and he misunderstood. So I read it in 5 books, but I thought dawn meant sunrise, but it doesn't. Like if you don't know a word, you kind of legally have to look it up. Someone comes from Italy and they say, well, the red light, I thought it meant when it's yellow. If you don't know the difference between red and yellow, you're still legally responsible. The judge may be more lenient with you, and Allah is merciful. But there's no necessary relationship between reward and validity. Your action could be valid but have no reward. And it could be invalid but it'd be rewarded. But you still have to do it. And it's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you do it the next time and you're rewarded. And someone who doesn't know, you don't correct them. Like if someone's completely unaware, and this is one of the mistakes people make. If someone really doesn't know, you have to prioritize what you correct them in. Right? What you correct them in. Number one. Number two, how you correct them. So someone like that, they just became Muslim, and they say, I fasted the whole month, eating during dawn. One thing, these are sensitive, matters of religious guidance are sensitive matters. Because religion matters more to people than most other things. Right? And few things weigh on a person's heart as much as their duty to their Lord. And you have to be careful about breaking people's hearts. Right? The Prophet ﷺ told Sayyidina Mu'adh, أَفَتَّانٌ أَنْتَ يَا Mu'adh? Are you a person who creates fitna, O Mu'adh? Sayyidina Mu'adh's intention was good. He was leading people with long recitation, thinking it was good to do. The Prophet ﷺ castigated him, reprimanded him for that. So, in those kinds of things, don't be hasty to tell people what to do. Tell them to go and consult and point them to the right. Because in many cases, you don't tell the person the right answer. You give them the rather, you direct them towards learning. And in due time, they may recognize. That's really important. Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib was once about to give the khutbah for Eid, which comes after the Eid prayer, and someone pointed out to them, there's all these people at the back who are praying. Tell them not to pray. Because we know during Eid prayer, on Eid day, you don't pray anything before the Eid prayer or after the Eid prayer until you get back home. Sayyidina Ali refused to correct those people. He said, I do not wish to be of those who stop people from worshipping their Lord. Because the reason is because the only reason they're doing it because they probably don't know. Right? And if they don't know, the real problem is not the mistake that they're making, but the fact that they don't know. Or the fact that they don't have enough religious drive, inspiration, or awareness to know. The problem might not even be knowledge itself. So you have to be careful and sensitive in those matters. And the way to be careful and sensitive is point them to someone who knows how to handle those cases. Right? Or sometimes, even if you know the answer, consider before you tell them. Consider before you tell them. So we'll stop there. Bismillah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. In the second session that I'll be doing, we'll be looking at some of the other issues that arise in fasting and some of the sunnahs related to the fast. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. A lot of practical issues come up that people wonder about regarding fasting. So inshallah what we're going to do is touch upon some of the common issues that come up, and we'll encourage you as we go through these common issues. If you have related questions, please do ask. So this is the second part. Having looked at the valid fast, there's some implications that arise from this. And one of the things that we talked about, but because it's an important aspect, one is accidents. Right? Accidents do break the fast. So be careful about rinsing your mouth, for example. Right? And caution is praiseworthy. But having misgivings is blameworthy in our deen, called waswasa. And caution is trying to do the right thing in the right way. That's caution. Caution is trying to do the right thing in the right way. As for misgivings, which is just entertaining doubts and fears, etc., it's against the sunnah. It's against the sunnah. Right? Rather, anytime you want to be careful what you do, is learn the right way of doing something and stick to it. And don't do more and don't do less. And that's all that you're called upon to do. So be careful about, rinsing mouth, for example, because that can lead to errors. Be careful too with regard to the beginning of Fajr time. Right? Right? So that don't risk, don't swallow your last bite at the moment that the time is about to enter. Right? That's why it's recommended to stop well in advance. Right? And hopefully that the difference between accidents and forgetfulness is clear. Any questions regarding accidents? Go ahead.
You said a question about perfume, unintentionally smelling a perfume.
Yes, smell is not a problem, but don't spray the perfume into your nose, right? Like if you have that would be a problem. But let's say, if you're clumsy like me, you're trying to put perfume on your neck or wherever, and it goes up your nose by that could be an accident. So be careful, right? That could be an accident. But someone douses you with a whole bunch of perfume, right? Let's say they have some kind of perfume puffer, right? And you breathe it in, that's excused, right? But if you spray perfume down your nose by accident, that's an accident. And you know for sure that it went in and down, it's unlikely, right? But a common question that arises, what if you find the fasting difficult? If you find the fasting difficult, for health reasons, for example. Now, in general, the assumption is that an adult who is not traveling and who does not have a genuine excuse, they're expected to fast. Right? An adult, male or female, if they're not traveling or sick, and sick doesn't mean just that they're ill, but sickness includes any kind of health condition, right? Or some other matter that would make fasting difficult, the assumption is that one has to fast. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. And for you to fast is better for you. In general. But then the ulama tell us that if you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. He has placed no hardship for you in matters of religion. And the hardship that is lifted in our deen is undue hardship. The hardship that is lifted is undue hardship. It is hardship that the like of it is considered unduly difficult to bear. Right? And there's two separate. We'll look next at if there's fear of harm. Right? But if it's unbearably difficult. And sometimes it's kind of hard to say, is it that difficult? And a facilitative way of seeing, is it just slight difficulty that you're finding it hard, and very often you can get used to things? Or if it's unduly difficult, and this is not a legal ruling, but just facilitative, just imagine if there's 10 people. Right? Would most of them consider it genuinely difficult? If they don't, then just do it. Right? Then do it. Unless there's fear of harm, which is a separate matter. Right? Because a certain amount, if you drink coffee, for example, I get asked regularly, because I know a lot of coffee addicts. I check myself. I skip drinking coffee once in a while, just not to be addicted to coffee. But, the first day or two, if you're drinking coffee several times a day, you can have caffeine withdrawal symptoms, etc. But it can be difficult, it'll give you headaches, etc. But that's considered slight hardship. Right? Undue hardship is that which would be unbearable. Right? Be unbearable. But this arises, some people are in northern latitudes, etc., where the fast is very long, etc., and signs, for example, like you start getting dizzy, or you're going to vomit, or faint, or there's a separate thing if there's fear of harm to your health. That's a separate matter. But what you do if there is fear of harm, you do fast, and when there's even the beginning of such symptoms, then you would stop. Then you would stop. So you don't allow yourself to get into that situation. But here in Toronto, for example, the fast is not that long that would be considered unusually difficult. Any questions here? Yeah. What if someone's traveling for recreational purposes in Ramadan? In the Hanafi school, the dispensations related to travel are connected to traveling. So someone's going to do something sinful, the dispensations still apply, because the dispensation is not for why they're traveling, but because of the fact that they're traveling. So someone was going to Las Vegas to gamble, God forbid. Are you excused from fasting while there? Yes, because and can you shorten the prayer? Actually, you have to shorten the prayer. Because the dispensations related to travel relate to the act of traveling. And also the act of traveling is not sinful. There's nothing sinful about your journey itself to Las Vegas. Because you could go to Las Vegas to visit the Muslims there and the fact that there's mosques. Or you go there to feed the homeless or to fight for workers' rights. Or you could do many good things going to Las Vegas besides the gambling. Right? It's God's earth, right? So, and you could change your intention. You get there and you say, Astaghfirullah, this is dunya. And, so the dispensations don't relate to why you're traveling. If you fear, so there's hardship in travel, similar to it is, what if you fear harm from the fasting? For medical reasons and the like. They say there's two types of fear. There's recognized fear. There's recognized fear and fear that is not recognized. Recognized fear is fear that has a reasonable basis. Fear that has a reasonable basis. And not recognized fear is one that does not have a recognized basis, right? It's considered baseless. It's like the person doesn't leave their house and say, what if I get run over by a car? It's a possibility, but is it a reasonable possibility? No. Right? But could you die, could you suddenly have a massive heart attack if you're fasting? Possible, but is it something that reasonably occurs to people who are fasting? No. So that's not recognized. This gets tricky when you seek medical opinion. Because doctors generally, and I've actually tested some doctor friends. I asked, if someone has this, should they fast? No, it's better to avoid it. I took them to task. What relationship is there between an eye infection and your fast? He says, none. So then why do you say it's better not to fast? Just in case. Right? And doctors, and this is worse if you're south of the border. In the US, because they're terrified of liability issues, right? Even Muslim doctors, right? They're terrified. So a doctor is not giving you a fatwa, right? A doctor is not giving you a fatwa. A doctor is giving you an expert opinion. You're the person who's morally responsible. So practically, unless the doctor is not just an expert in their field, but they're someone who is religiously upright and who knows how to apply their expert knowledge to the religious considerations, you take their opinion as an expert judgment. You're the person morally responsible. You assess, is this reasonable fear of harm or not? So don't seek a fatwa from your doctor. Ask them, okay, what is the fear? Right? Because you ask a doctor in any situation, they'll say, generally, and there's some who are better at it. Actually, in here, Canada, things are less. There's less fear of liability, etc. They tend to be more reasonable, and a lot of doctors, even in the broader society, they'll have experience with Muslim patients, etc. And so you take their opinion into account, but ask yourself, is this reasonable fear of harm, or is it just far-fetched? Is this far-fetched? And the basis is that in most circumstances, fasting normally does not harm you. Right? There's enough Muslims out there fasting that would establish that, right? It's not something that you're the first person fasting on earth. So if there's, some kind of, but you take expert opinion into account. So if you have a particular health condition, they say, if there's reasonable fear, right? And what is there that this could affect, for example, someone's diabetic, for example, someone has a particular condition and it disturbing their schedule of medication, it could reasonably lead to harmful consequences, then yeah, harm is warded off in our deen, right? Any questions here? That's the principle. There's many applications to this. Right? So you ask yourself the question, is there a reasonable fear of harm? If there is, you don't have to be sure that there'll be harm, but there's reasonable fear. Right? And that reasonable fear could be based on previous experience. Last time you tried to fast in that kind of way, you fainted and fell straight into the toilet or something, right? Or there's clear signs that no two people will tell you that you can fast in that kind of case. Or thirdly, you got an expert opinion and you're reasonably sure that this establishes reasonable fear. Right? And that's what you do with most doctors' opinion, is does that establish reasonable fear of harm? Okay. There's a question? Go ahead.
So what happens if someone, say for example, doing a sports event like they're running a marathon, for example, a 10K marathon.
Yeah. No, so sports are not an excuse from fasting. Sports are not an excuse from fasting. Can you engage in exercise or sport or any other physical activity while you're fasting? Yes, but the fasting is an obligation. Right? Fasting is regularly mentioned with prayer. Right? Right? That it's one of the most incumbent of our outward duties. So you don't leave it just out of something discretionary. You say, well, I'm training for the marathon, for the London Marathon, so I can't fast. Who said you have to do the London Marathon? Right? It's not. And with sports, it gets, there's ways, but actually, leading athletes regularly fast. As we know, in the NBA, a lot of soccer players in Europe there are many Muslims, especially in France and elsewhere, and so many of them do fast. Right? But technically, you are obligated to fast if you're a resident. Now, many athletes, there's a way around. That's why, in exceptional cases, consult, because many athletes, they're considered travelers anyways. So the rulings of travelers may well apply to them. Right? They may well apply to them, and they should consult. Right? That's why a general ruling doesn't necessarily apply to every particular. Someone may be considered a traveler, and in some sensitive professions, you could legally remain a traveler and not have to fast. Right? There's ways, and that's why people should consult, because often things are much easier than people imagine. But, fear of not doing well on an exam is a poor excuse, right? In the general case, right? No, you fast, and if anything, if you're, and that's one of the reasons one should be used to one's acts of worship, right? If you get accustomed to fasting, fasting should not weaken you. Right? The basis is that fasting should not weaken you. Any other questions here? Of course, there's a very obvious question that people have when there's fear with respect to fasting is pregnancy and nursing. Right? That's one of the common cases of fear. And the same principles apply. In all four schools of Sunni Islam, the basis is that both the pregnant woman and the woman nursing, the basis is that if able to fast without undue hardship and without fear of harm, the basis is that they fast. But if there is undue hardship, right, it totally drains the person and they're not, and it's unbearable, or there's fear of harm. They have a particular sensitive medical condition. Or there's, with respect to nursing, there's fear of harm for the baby while nursing, or for the nursing child. If there's fear of harm, it's affecting the milk supply, for example, in a significant manner, then one does not have to fast. And different people are different. There's some people who fast. I once mentioned in class that I know a number of people who, and many women can't fast. So this one sister, she's like really tough person, which caused many problems in her marriage. But anyway, she said, I'm 8 months pregnant, and I go to the gym. It was like some shocking number of times a week. Like I was kind of worried just because, like, who goes to the gym 6 days a week? And I like too much information. I do strength training and this, and I fast. So okay, like, did I say it's haram for you to fast? No, but like, so some people are able to fast while pregnant and nursing, and for other people, it can be an undue hardship. If it is, then you don't have to fast. If there's some reasonable fear of harm for the mother or for the child, then one does not need to fast. Right? In Jordan, our next door neighbors were Bedouins. It was one of the coolest experiences in my life. And the Bedouin lady, she told my wife, that you Westerners you're weak. Said, we would still be taking care of, we'd be still shepherding our sheep while pregnant, while fasting, and we deliver our babies in the fields and just wrap it in a cloth and continue shepherding. Okay. Like, God bless you. But, the deen is for everybody. For the physically strong and for the physically weak. Right? And there's a whole range of, but there is a misperception that pregnancy is an automatic dispensation from fasting. That's not the case. That nursing is an automatic dispensation from fasting. That's not the case. If there's fear of harm, reasonable fear of harm, if there's genuine hardship or reasonable fear of harm, then yes, there's no hardship, no harm in our deen. But if it's not difficult and there's no reasonable fear of harm, then one fasts. And if not sure, begin. Right? Begin. If someone's pregnant, be properly nourished. Begin the fast, and if you begin feeling that this will be unbearably difficult, then before it becomes that way, you can break your fast. And then try again. You may find that it becomes easier, or you may realize that no, this is unduly difficult, then it's lifted. Any questions here? Go ahead. Like in a Muslim school?
No, in a public school.
That's not an expert opinion.
So, I mean, from their stance, they're an expert educator. They know their students. So.
No, that's not true. Like that one would question authority. That I mean, we respect authority, but we don't take authority, even religious authority, we don't take it blindly. You know, Shaykh gives a bizarre fatwa, we don't have to listen to it, right? Like you ask, you know, like ultimately we're morally responsible, right? We're morally responsible. Someone says something bizarre, you know, I say, well, they're the experts, right? So if your doctor makes an obvious mistake, right? Like, you know, you have a heart condition and they give you medicine that you know, just from general reading, that this is actually not for heart patients, and you take it and you die, on the Day of Judgment, could you say, well, that's what the doctor said? No, because ultimately you're morally responsible, both in life choices and in religious choices as well, right? So we have a conditional following of experts, right? And can a child fast during exams? Of course, if they're not an adult yet, then they're not obligated to fast. That's a separate matter. But just at the legal level, who's like an educator? On what basis are you saying that children who fast are adversely affected? Like, yeah. So there's no. So that's not expert. That's not authority, right? Authority has to have a basis, right? Has to have relevant expertise, etc. Right? So, and that applies religiously too. We don't just take authority blindly. And people if they have authority, they have authority in their area. Someone could have expertise in one field but not in another. Right? I asked my family doctor about certain health things, and he said, "Look, this is not my expertise. You should ask, to consult the specialist." Right? And which is good. It's a good sign because anyone should know their limits, and scholars also should know their limits, but many don't in our times. Right? So one should be aware of that. And also at the community level, right? Like there's a separate thing that who has who makes decisions for a child. There's a community responsibility as well to safeguard reasonable accommodation, right? And it's not this idea of the state knows better, or the school knows better, or whoever, big brother, big whatever they call it in the politically correct age, knows better. The answer is probably not, right? So they're separate at the community level, no, right? Brushing the teeth is permissible during the fast, right? It's sunnah, as we know, to brush one. You're rewarded for brushing your teeth if you intend the sunnah at any time, right? You can use the toothstick, the siwak, all day in Ramadan. The Shafi'is limited the use of the siwak, according to prevalent opinion in the Shafi'i school, until the midday. The Imam Nawawi of the Shafi'is disagreed. The Hanafi said, no, it remains a sunnah all day to brush your teeth. Because bad breath is not an act of worship, right? Including when you're fasting. The problem with the toothbrush arises from use of toothpaste, right? From use of toothpaste. If you find yourself needing to use it, then use only a little. Something I didn't believe when Shaykh Hamza said it first time, but he was right, is that all the people who sell you things that get used up have a vested interest in using a lot of it. So when it comes to shampoo or soap or toothpaste or all these things, they want to encourage you to use a lot. You could use a speck of toothpaste, like a tiny little bit of toothpaste, and it's enough. But they don't want you to do that. They don't want you, like all the images show like 10 times more toothpaste than you probably need. So if you just use a little, then it's much easier, right? And just rinse out your mouth once. Any questions here? Go ahead. Yep, behind. Go ahead, uncle. Jazakallah, those are. So the first question, that if someone works in some very physically demanding work, right, such that before the end of the day they need to break their fast. So where one has discretion over one's schedule, one needs to arrange things such that one's work would not threaten one's fast. Right? Right? That, you adjust your timings, etc. You work a night shift, or you adjust things to be able to fast. Or maybe, in many lines of work, there's different aspects to the work. You could be assigned to something less physically demanding, etc. So with respect to the work itself, or you know that you need a lot more energy, so you find out how to take care of your, to have the proper nutrition, etc. To be able to do that, if you can, then you have to take the means to be able to fast, right? If even despite that, and needing that work, right, you find that the fast becomes unduly difficult, or you fear harm if you were not to break the fast, then you could, right? So, for example, if you're doing construction work outside, etc., in some cases it may be obligatory. Like if there's a heat wave and you're working outside, and if you don't break your fast, you may die. It'll be obligatory to break your fast, right? If there's genuine fear of harm, of life or limb, it'd be obligatory for you to break your fast, right? And in particular cases, if this is going to be an ongoing thing, then one should consult about the specifics of one's situation. Go ahead. Mouthwash, in general, taking some foreign substance into your mouth unnecessarily is to be avoided. But if one's going to use it, one use only a little, and then one rinses it out thoroughly. Right? But don't gargle or anything like that. But there's this in itself. There's dislikedness in it. So unless one's in a situation where one has at work, one has to deal closely with clients, or etc. There's there's a lot there's a big social dimension to one's work, etc. That would be affected, and it won't be sufficient just to use a siwak, for example, etc. Then that's a separate case. But proactively, one can very often, what one eats before the fast, like at suhoor time, for example, can affect. Like there's all kinds of things that one can find out, like that would, and if one cleans one's teeth thoroughly, etc. beforehand, one uses mouthwash early in the day. But still, one could have to meet clients later in the day, and if there's genuine need, then one would be allowed. Would the siwak be the best option? It can, but there's a lot of consideration for some people. Some people have sensitive gums, and if they use a siwak, their gums bleed, for example. Or someone just has so much bad breath that it needs sort of, they need to sort of do the equivalent of fumigating their mouth, right? So there's leeway, right? Now, what if you need to take medication? If you can structure it around the fast, then you structure it around the fast, right? You have to also ask, there's a difference between medication that you need for treatment, right? And things that you take that would be considered to be akin to supplements for health. So I take whatever supplement twice a day. Well, you don't have to. Firstly, that's not medication. Right? That's a supplement. Whatever they take. It's not a medical comment, but let's say they take vitamin D twice a day, for example. Right? Don't take it. And the sign that something is a supplement is that it's for strength, it's for improving your health rather than for treatment and healing. And then with the medication, one has to ask, Is there genuine need? Is there fear of harm? Is it warding off undue hardship, etc.? Right? So, if one is able to restructure it, right, or get different doses. Some things, the ideal way you would have it is 3 times a day, but it's also possible to have it once a day, and you can have it at suhoor or iftar time, then that's fine. But if you can't, right, and it is genuinely needed, then you may be excused from fasting. You may be excused from fasting. And certain health conditions, that's the case. Right? And it's good to get a doctor's opinion on that, and ask yourself, is this reasonable hardship or reasonable fear of harm? And in that kind of case, where you wanted to fast, but due to genuine fear or hardship, you're not able to fast, you do not miss out on the reward in any way whatsoever. You have the full reward of wanting to fast. And then if you are later able to fast and you do so then, you're rewarded a second time for the actual fasting. So it's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, just a small note here. One should keep in mind that there's fiqh to healthy living. Okay. In that it is well established in the Sharia that anything that there's levels of harm, doing something that will lead to direct, immediate harm is immediately impermissible. For you to drink poison and die, haram, right? Anything that will lead to direct, immediate harm in loss of life or limb or other grave harm is immediately haram. But there's 2 other levels of harm. Anything that will lead to harm, anything that can reasonably lead to harm, has dislikedness in it. Says, well, I eat chocolate cake after every meal. I'm still alive. Right? But you can safely say that if you have chocolate pudding for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and if you know anything about sugar, it's going to lead to there'll be some degree of dislikedness in doing something like that. I only have 5 cups of tea every day with 2 spoonfuls of sugar in each. This does apply to that. Right? And now when it does, that's tricky, but one needs to be careful. From that is eating one's fill. Eating one's fill is disliked in the Sharia. And why? Because it can lead to harm. And when it will surely lead to harm, not immediate but long term, any reasonable person saying this is what you do, this will lead to grave harm, the sum of those actions would be considered a sinful act. Because your body is a trust. And there's a lot of negligence with that. Sheikh Nuh Keller teaches this amazing class on what's called higher health on qibla.com. And though some knowledge makes you guilty because it's, but it is part of, taking care of one's health is part of the sunnah. So this is something to keep in mind. Children, any questions regarding that before we continue? Go ahead.
When you mentioned about, you mentioned that the taste in the throat, that it does not break the fast. But many inhalers, when you take the medicine, it's deposited in your bronchioles or in your throat as well, and it leaves a little taste.
So inhalers break the fast.
Yeah, so why does the inhaler break the fast but not?
Because the eye is not considered a normal point of entry into the body cavity.
I thought that when you're applying alcohol and clogging your mouth.
No. If you applied it to you don't apply it to your eyelid, and sometimes it can just be pure waswasa, pure misgivings. Because you smelled it, because especially, fresher kuhl has a slight smell to it. And that could trigger all kinds of funny things. So in general, ignore sensations. right? Children and fasting before they're 7, there's a general you generally encourage them in whichever way one chooses to encourage them to fast. But from the age of 7, one specifically encourages them to fast, to get them used to it. And this works differently for different children and different parents, but we see from the prophetic guidance with respect to prayer, and it applies to fasting as well. From the age of 7, you begin specifically encouraging them to fast, such that by the age of 10, they're now ready to fast the whole month of Ramadan. And this is from mercy. So from before that, you get them used to the idea of fasting, even from before they're 7, but there's no specific emphasis nor expectation. From the age of 7, they're specifically encouraged with an increasing degree of emphasis till they reach the age of 10. By the age of 10, they're not yet adults. They're not yet morally responsible, but 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Over 3 or 4 years, depending on how you count it, right? They should get used to being to their prayer, likewise, their fasting. From the age of 10, what's expected of an adult is expected of a 10-year-old child. If you could erase a term from your parenting vocabulary, and you do very well to erase it, there's no such thing as a teenager. There's no such thing as a teenager. That's a consumerist construction to encourage foolish behavior. Because foolish behavior you can make much more money off than intelligent behavior. Right? A 10-year-old is on the way to becoming an adult. Right? A child, once they hit their puberty, they're a young adult. They're an adult in training. Right? And they're not yet fully adult. So if some random guy called Amir has $10 million, $100 million, if he gives 10 million to his child at the age of 12, and the child squanders it, you're the fool, right? You're the fool for giving that, right? So, because they're still an adult in training, but they're dealt with as an adult, right? And that's something important to keep in mind. And after the age of 10, with these previous things considered, they're disciplined regarding it if they don't, if they're negligent. And of course, this, just as a matter of context, and we have to stop very soon, but texts have a context, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, وَضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلِيهَا, right? And literally it says, if you translate it literally, and hit them regarding it once after they're 10. But any sensible person, right, hitting the child, right, is not sunnah. It's not an act of worship. So it's okay, 1 hit, 10 rewards, 2, 20, 30, 40, 50. If that's the case, then just don't let them pray and just keep hitting them. You get lots of reward. Every prayer, hit them a few times, you get some reward. That's not the case, right? That's not the case. The darb here, firstly, the Prophet ﷺ never ever hit anyone. He never hit a spouse. He never hit a child. The Prophet ﷺ never ever hit an animal. An animal, the Prophet ﷺ never hit. The Prophet ﷺ, contrary to just general norms, not just of his own people, but everywhere, when he rode an animal, a donkey or a mule or a horse or a camel, he would not strike the animal. Rather, he would nudge the animal out of his exceeding mercy. From that, Imam Abu Hanifa took that even if you strike an animal like a horse normally, if I'm riding Sidi Amir's horse and I struck it normally, just within what's considered normal striking of the horse, and the horse died, I have to compensate you for the horse, even though that was within normal usage. Because why did I hit the horse? I could have done something else. So, and Imam Hanif, there's reasons why, the basis being the practice of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is a misconception. The hitting there is mentioned as discipline. But discipline, ta'deeb, is that which, if done, will be a means to good results. Right? And in cases where generally parents would not physically discipline a child, in the general case, with restraint, with the right purpose, with restraint, towards good results, right? Exhausting other means, the general ruling of hitting a child would be that it's a mafsada. It is a harm. And the Prophet is not telling to hit your child. That's why it's probably much better to translate the hadith and discipline them regarding it once they've reached the age of 10. And one could put a footnote, literally it says this, and this is what it's meant. Wallahu a'lam. There's also sunnahs related to the fast, which our teachers will mention. We won't go into them. Dr. Omar and Habib Qadim, especially in his talk, mentions a number of these. It's important to remind oneself regarding the key sunnahs of fasting and to prepare to make the most of them. And these will be mentioned in those sessions. Keep in mind, don't neglect Taraweeh. Taraweeh is an emphasized sunnah. 20 rak'ahs is considered sunnah across the 4 schools. It's not a controversial matter. Right? It is sunnah. So someone doesn't want to do it. If you pray 2 rak'ahs, you are rewarded for praying 2 rak'ahs. But the sunnah itself, as is clear from the time of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, and who only did that which the Sahaba understood to be the prophetic practice, was that 20 rak'ahs were prayed. Some prayed more than that. And it's sunnah for men and women. Congregation is recommended if you're able to catch the congregation. The time is late. If you can only catch a little of the congregation, catch what you can. If you can't catch any of the congregation, still try to pray it, even if you do it briefly. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever stands in Ramadan out of faith and sincere seeking of reward, all their past sins are forgiven. There's tremendous reward in Taraweeh. Do it. And if you find it difficult, do the best you can. If you can't do something completely, don't leave it completely. Even if you pray it briefly, try to pray it. It's possible to pray 20 rak'ahs in 10 minutes. Right? Without being hasty. Right? And there's great benefit in it. Last thing we're going to mention is part of the month of Ramadan is the social dimension. Right? But the social dimensions are means of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. There's tremendous virtue in feeding others. Feeding someone who's fasting is like the reward of fasting. Because it doesn't absolve you of fasting. You can't just say, okay, I'll feed other people and I'm not fasting. No, your first responsibility is to yourself. But this in terms of virtue and reward. There's tremendous virtue in feeding others. Right? Just the act of feeding others, whoever you feed. But besides that, there's many opportunities in the act of feeding others. Right? Especially in Ramadan. This is an opportunity to reconnect, to strengthen, or reconnect family ties. There's family members and it's easy to get disconnected, even with close family members. Nasrullah al-afiyah. We live in an age of being rushed, right? And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us the tawfiq to fulfill the rights of our immediate family. And the very least, in any definition of family, right? Like your uncles, your immediate uncles and aunts are considered immediate family, like by any standard of imagination. Your first cousins, there's a degree of clear responsibility at that level, at that first circle. So you have your parents, your siblings, that's like, but then the next circle is your immediate uncles and aunts and your first cousin. And that's not easy. Right? But at least seasonally, one should see at least seasonal opportunities to connect. Right? And one of the opportunities is Ramadan. Ties of friendship are easy to squander, this is an opportunity to reconnect with them. But also to reconnect yourself with community. It's easy to become disconnected from the community you're part of. Whether the physical community of your neighborhood or the religious or other communities you're part of. And this is a time to reconnect yourself with community and broader, social circles that you know you should be connected with, but also for you to connect the disconnected. So you're inviting family over, but you find you're never able to keep in touch with your neighbors. Invite a couple of neighbors over. Right? And family gatherings are very absorbent very often. Like when you've invited 20 Palestinians over, 3 or 4 Palestinians or Hyderabadis or whatever, a few more people doesn't really make a difference. Family gatherings can get boring. So you have the random white dude who showed up, like it adds some, it's like you put some different spices into the kebab, right? Like it's kind of like, be interesting, right? So use it, have high intentions in these opportunities, right? And this is also another of the dimensions of the month, that there's a potential for a lot of good. Any questions before we pause for Dhuhr and then for Habib Qadim's session? Go ahead.
How do you balance reconnecting socially and also spending time on your own social life?
Yeah. So how do you balance between the social dimensions and the spiritual dimensions? One is that Allah, it's part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom that He's given us many doors of turning to Him. Right? And they say, if Allah opens certain doors of good for you, then stick to them. And you may find, that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, istafti qalbak, ask your heart. And what do you ask your heart? Right? The heart is the capacity within you that turns towards others. Right? And that has in an emotive sense with other people, but it's the capacity within you, the spiritual heart is the capacity within you that turns towards the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what do you ask your heart? The Prophet said, istafti qalbak. Ask your heart that what will be more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Normally, you try to strike some kind of balance. But in some cases, they may be a very particular thing that you need to do. You may be in a situation where you caused a major family crisis. You told all your cousins and relatives that you were all going to hell. God forbid, don't never do anything. Let's say you told them all you're going to hell. And then your parents are mad at you. Your siblings are estranged. So maybe you might spend the whole month of Ramadan just doing a fix-up job. You're trying to fix all your family relations because you messed them up. Right? Maybe that's the act of worship for you. Right? But Ramadan is primarily a month of turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the primary thing. It's very clear from the verses that we pointed to in the beginning, from Surah Al-Baqarah. But the social, because you're going to eat anyways. Right? That's one. So you're going to eat anyways. Have other people eat with you. One of the aspects, how do you strike the balance? One thing is to follow the sunnah. And one of the sunnahs with respect to food is not to have takalluf. Is not to be, not to, and takalluf is very difficult word to translate. Takalluf is not to make things excessive or overbearing or difficult. The sunnah to invite people is not sunnah to cook many different types of food. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ encouraged, خَيْرُ الطَّعَامِ مَا كَثُرَتْ عَلَيْهِ الْأَيَادِي. The best of food is what most hands eat from. So make something that that's plentiful that people can eat from, but you keep it simple so that it's not difficult to do. Right? You try to set things up in a way, and actually many other sunnahs are facilitative. If you think about, and it may not be practicable in particular circumstances, you have to be sensitive to other people, but if you ate according to the sunnah where people ate from one big platter, how many dishes do you have to do after? Pretty much nothing, because everyone's eating from a big platter. But, there's some people, if you invited that way, like I know some relatives, if you invite them to one big platter, they're like, what's this? They might walk away, right? So you have to be sensitive to that. But, so you have a balanced simplicity, right? So you honor your guest, but without making things difficult, right? And also in that, for men who are very negligent in that, Sayyidah Aisha was asked, what did the Prophet ﷺ do when he was home? He was ﷺ, كان في حاجة أهله. He was in the fulfillment of need of his family. So that's an important part of it as well, right? Cooking in Ramadan is not the women's responsibility, right? I mean, they may be whatever sharing of duty, but there needs to be a balanced sharing, right? There needs to be a balanced sharing. How one strikes the balance, one has to figure out something that is sustainable, right? That's sustainable. But sometimes one may find it difficult, to invite a lot of people over, but one should not miss out on the social dimension of eating with other people. There's a profound spiritual aspect to eating with others. That there's a blessedness, right, in being with other fasting people who break the fast. So if you can avoid breaking fast on your own, avoid it. Even if whether you go to the masjid and just break the fast there, or find someone else. You're working till late. Find someone else who's working late and break fast together. Right? To the extent reasonably possible. It may not always be possible, because that's the social dimension balances some of the heaviness of the fast as well. Because fasting is not an easy act on one's own. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala alam. Any last questions before we break? Go ahead. Yeah. So if you take a deliberate bath, sorry, I forgot that question. There's nothing disliked with taking a bath during Ramadan, right? If it makes fasting easy, that's fine. The only time it will be blameworthy if you do it because you don't like fasting. What's this fast? So you decide to relax, in a tub of water out of a sense of let me get over this fast kind of thing. That's according to the intention. But in itself, there's nothing disliked with taking a bath. Whether it is to make the fast easier, you take a bath or a shower, nothing wrong with that. Or for cleanliness. You want to be fresh before you go to someone's iftar. There's absolutely no dislike in showering or bathing in the month of Ramadan. Only you avoid doing it out of a sense of finding the fast a burden. Okay. So we'll pause here, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, for dhuhr, and we have some snacks, and then we'll resume. The Habib Qadim lesson is amazing. Okay. He recorded it at by Nabiullah Hud in the valley of Hadramaut. And even if you weren't to listen to it, it's spectacular. It's one of the most surreal places on earth. It's really beautiful. I don't know how they pulled it off. I was actually kind of impressed because, Hadramaut in Yemen, how they pulled off that spectacular thing. But mashallah, it's very beautiful. And we have a message from Dr. Omar, which is really powerful. And then at the end we'll have a brief Q&A. We've taken a lot of questions, but if there are residual questions, we'll take them at the end, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala.